Hi, it's Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, and I'm back with my plans and pans. Well, I had an incredible week that I'm anxious to tell you about. I had the privilege of going in a bipartisan way to Nairobi, Kenya, to learn a lot about Africa and about what is going on in Kenya. So the 18 members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats, were greeted by the United States ambassador to Kenya named Meg Whitman, who has a history as a corporate CEO and has been there for a year and is such an energetic and effective leader. We're very proud to hear from her and her commitment to the U.S.-Kenya relationship and all the work that she is doing on issues of trade, on issues of helping the people of Kenya. But the other thing that she talked about was she started with why Africa? Why should we be interested in Africa? And she was telling us that 1 in every 4 people on the planet, human beings, will by 2050 be in Africa. She also pointed out that Africa is the youngest continent and that 65% of the population is under the age of 25 years old. Then she also asked the question, so why Kenya? And why should we be interested in Kenya? And she pointed out that Kenya is a very educated country. That is, people speak English as well as Swahili, and that they are the gate to Eastern Africa, and that the U.S.-Kenya relationship is very strong. In addition to an array of speakers and conversation with the members of Congress and the experts, the scholars who spoke to us about every single day, we also had incredible site visits that I wanted you to hear about. One of the problems in Kenya and throughout Africa is acute malnutrition. Unfortunately, malnutrition has increased dramatically in the last several years. Climate change, which has really affected the agriculture and the ability to provide foods. The global pandemic had a major influence. And the supply chain, because the war in Ukraine has meant that some of the food that was going to Africa is no longer going that way. One of the positive things on the food nutrition front is that there are new technologies that we were able to see. For example, in this little package is life-saving food that can be presented to infants and children. I actually tasted it. It's like a very sweet and thick peanut butter, and children like it, and it is very helpful to them and, of course, to their parents who are so relieved to see their children be able to come around. One of the most important contributions of the United States of America began when President George W. Bush initiated a program called PEPFAR. People were dying throughout the African continent from HIV/AIDS, and PEPFAR over the years now has contributed medicine and what is needed to prevent and to address HIV/AIDS. Even to today, we saw a program called Dream Girls that is funded through PEPFAR. And the intention of that site was to show how young women are taught to be empowered, to be able to stand up for themselves and make sure that they do everything they can to avoid HIV/AIDS. Our group was able to see firsthand the advantages of conservation and sound management of natural resources by going to the Maasai Mara Reserve. It was really an incredible experience to be able to see all of these animals. From this experience, I see how important it is for members of Congress, for people who actually have a role in conservation, to see actually up close and personal the animals in their native habitat. We were able to see elephants and zebras and giraffes and lions and all of these animals, thousands of them, running through their land. But there is right now a real crisis when it comes to poaching. And the United States can help the international community in addressing this trafficking of wild animals. In many ways, the hardest part of the trip, the one that really touched my heart, was our visit to the Kakuma Refugee Camp. It's in northern Kenya. It's very hot and crowded. And actually, there are over 200,000 people who live in various parts of this refugee camp. They come from all over Africa, from South Sudan and Somalia and Ethiopia and Congo and Eritrea and Uganda and Rwanda. And they are refugees because they can no longer live on their land because of the violence that is taking place throughout the continent. Many reasons drive them from their homeland. And of course, these are people, as all refugees, who it is not easy to leave the place that you were born and raised, but when you have to, they are able to go to this refugee camp. But I have to tell you, we saw a lot of Americans in this place as well. People who are working and helping to provide these refugees with what they need, and U.S. programs that are involved. I met a woman actually who grew up in my district who works for the United Nations food program. In this camp, there were Americans working at the hospital. And I will never forget walking through one of these rooms in the hospital where there was a child literally screaming because he did not have enough to eat. Now, he was getting treated, and I am hoping for his mother's sake that was sitting next to this baby. But that sound is something that I will absolutely never forget. And the gratitude I have for the people who were working there to make sure that lives are saved. But I want to say this. The United States of America, it's true, when it comes to the dollar figure, has spent the most around the world for foreign assistance. But when it comes to the percentage, the United States is actually pretty far behind. If you ask most Americans, how much money do we spend on foreign assistance? They'll say up to 25%. Why are we spending all that money around the world when we need money here at home? Actually, it's less than 1%. Actually, even further, it's less than 0.6% that the United States spends on foreign assistance. And when we gathered at the end of this wonderful program, I said, my colleagues, Democrats and Republicans, one thing we ought to think about is maybe we ought to introduce a bipartisan piece of legislation that says that the United States of America will spend no more than 2% on foreign assistance, which would more than double the amount of money that we spend. And I also made the point that security is threatened when people around the world are starving, are unable to live in places that are hospitable to human beings. These are the kinds of things that bring on war and violence. So as much as we want to help people, we want to help ourselves as well, to have a more peaceful world as well as a more healthy world. All of these things came to the fore, I think, for most of us, all of us that were on this trip, to see that we need to do as much as we can to make the world, and that includes Africa, it includes Kenya, it includes children and adults who are struggling to survive. We can do better. So that is a trip that I will carry with me for the rest of my days, and I am privileged to be able to take these kinds of experiences as a member of Congress. So have a wonderful week, and I will see you next week. Thank you for watching my video. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel and follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, where my handle is @Jan Schakowsky.